Hello, this is MrChabry, and what we're going to talk about today is the electric types that you can find in Pokemon X and Pokemon Y. So the electric type, that is a cool typing. There's a handful of really good ones that if you want to use an electric type on your team. And I want to tell you which ones I suggest, which ones I think you should skip out on, and which ones could be useful for like a challenge run or something like that. Well, we're going to start off with the first one that shows up in the X and Y Kalos decks, and that's going to be Raichu. So Raichu is a pretty speedy Pokemon with a 110 speed stat, and that's really its best stat. Attack and special attack are decent at 90. It's not going to be doing a lot of surprise knockouts, but you're going to be able to, especially in the early game, once you get access to Raichu, you're going to be able to do some work with this thing. And it is on the frailer side, especially on the defense. You can see here 60 HP and 60 or 55 defense. So not the best in terms of defenses, but you want to hit hard. You want to hit fast, rather. You're not going to hit that hard. Now, you do have options. Like, Nasty Plot will actually boost up your special attack, and that's very useful. Or you can go with a set that maybe you run physical attacks, like Brick Break. Now, that will help you out against rock types that you come across. You can do something with Quick Attack. A lot of people run Quick Attack on this thing because it gives you speed. Now, you don't necessarily need Quick Attack for that speed, but it will help you out. Nuzzle will help you paralyze things. Now, this is in terms of like an in-game team. So kind of the level up moves. You've got a few options there. But yeah, this is a Pokemon. It's decent. It'll help you out in the game. It does get outclassed by some other electric types. But in the early game, this thing can actually do a lot of work. On the other end, though, we have two Pokemon that are very similar. And these are two Pokemon that I would suggest skipping. And that's Plusle and its counterpart, Minun. Now, the problem with these two Pokemon is that stats-wise, they're not that great. You see 95 speed. Now, that's a decent speed stat, but that's it. That's all they got. They are on the frailer side with, 60 HP, 50 defense, 40 defense on this thing, and special defense on either one's not the best. I mean, mine has a little bit of an edge, but not enough to qualify using this. Now, keep in mind, these two Pokemon do not evolve, so whatever stat you're looking at here, that's it. That's what they get. And they're not going to do much with their attack stat. They're not going to be able to survive that many hits. And even looking at special attack, I mean, Plusle does have a slight edge, but it's not enough to really use. Abilities-wise, if you do want to run these things, say you're doing a challenge run and you want to use some of the most garbage electric types, well, you want Volt Absorb for your Minun or Lightning Rod for Plusle. The reason is because the other ability, Plus and Minus, are some of the worst abilities in the game. If you have Minus, you have to have it in. It only works in double battles. And your ally has to have the Plus, and it's the same thing with Plus, only with Minus as your partner Pokemon. So these two, abilities-wise, are just not that great. This is a Pokemon that you should skip out. Next up is Heliolisk. Now, I do think Heliolisk is a really cool electric type. It has good speed, 109, good special attack at 109, and it has okay special defense. Now, this thing's kind of the idea of a glass cannon. You want it to hit hard, you want it to hit fast. And it does give you not only an electric typing, but a normal typing. And when it comes to its abilities, it has some really cool ones, like Dry Skin. I would say Dry Skin is probably your best bet if you're doing like an in-game run-through, because it is pretty much immune to water moves. If it gets hit with a water-type move, it will actually be healed up. And if you run something with, like, say, Rain Dance, it'll actually heal itself up as well. Now, keep in mind, Dry Skin actually does give it a slight weakness to fire. That's the interesting thing with that ability. You get a water immunity, but a fire weakness. But being able to heal up and switch in on water types are actually really cool. Now, the other ability, which is great, and I think this is actually a hidden ability, is Solar Power. Quick rundown. This thing boosts your special attack. It's great in competitive. If you're doing this competitively, Solar Power is the way to go. But in-game, Dry Skin's probably the best way. Sandveil, I mean, that could help you out. It just raises your evasiveness in Sandstorm. Now, this thing does have some cool moves. You can run something like Volt Switch, but I would say Thunderbolt has to be on your team, and Hyper Voice. These two are great moves, stab moves, for this Pokemon right here. This is a pretty good Pokemon. It does kind of get outclassed, and it is very frail, but this is actually a really decent electric type. Next up is Manectric. Now, looking at Manectric, it is really close to the idea of Heliolisk, but it's just slightly less special attack, slightly less speed, and a little bit more attack. And it does have a little bit more in terms of survivability with physical bulk. But, you know, Helios has better special defense. Now, with that out of the way, this is a great electric type, too. You have decent speed, decent special attack. You have Lightning Rod, which is a great ability. You're going to boost up your special attack stats if they try to use an electric move on you. So, it actually makes sense to say if you're facing someone that has an electric type, and you have something weak to electric moves, switch into this, get that Lightning Rod boost, and then you're going to hit things really hard. And not only that, with Manectric, you also have access to Mega Manectric. Now, Mega Manectric is a great Pokemon, too. It has increased speed and increased special attack. Look at that, 135 on both of those. Intimidate. Now, you know, this thing is more of on the frailer side, but with that Intimidate, you're going to give it some survivability in terms of physical damage. And this Pokemon has a really good moveset. Give it Thunderbolt, of course, because that's going to be your stab. That's going to be your strongest move. But it also learns Flamethrower and Overheat, which is a great coverage for this thing. So yeah, this thing does get good coverage in terms of Flamethrower. You know, that's already great. That's probably the best thing, Thunderbolt, Flamethrower. You can also throw Signal Beam for coverage. But really, just those right there. And that's not including Volt Switch, which will give you some momentum when you need to switch out. I'm not going to suggest Hidden Power Ice, because if you're doing this in-game, you're kind of limited on how much control you have over the Hidden Power type. But giving it Hidden Power Ice does give you some options against ground types, which otherwise Manectric does struggle with. But yeah, this is a great Pokemon. If you get Mega Manectric onto your team, it does a lot better. Now, another Pokemon that does well, and as you're going to see, a lot of these electric types are actually very fast and have good special attack. Now, we will come across one that kind of bucks that trend, but so far with Jolteon, we're going to continue seeing that trend. Now, 130 speed is great. This thing will be able to outspeed so many things. 110 special attack is also pretty good. Decent special defense. And Volt Absorb, of course, is a great ability. You can heal yourself up. Quick Feet, I would say that's more situational. It is a hidden ability, so you're not really going to have access to it most of the time on an in-game team. But what it does is it doubles your speed, or 1.5, rather, your speed if you are statused. So yeah, this thing's already fast, so you don't even need Quick Feet. Now, I do remember when I used Jolteon in draft leagues, I did use Quick Feet just for tech against super fast things. But other than that, your in-game team, Volt Absorb is the way to go. Thunderbolt on this thing, of course. You can give it Wish, and it's fast. You can give it Wish, and it'll be able to heal up someone. Now, the only problem I would say with this is it's kind of limited in its coverage. You can see here, it does get Signal Beam, but that's pretty much it in terms of decent special attacks. You can see here that its move pool is not the best, especially for a special attacker. You can see a lot of physical attacks, actually. Now, if this was a physical attacker, that would be great. But move pool-wise, Thunderbolt and maybe Signal Beam, Volt Switch, something like that would be your best bet. But other than that, it is a great Pokemon, a great electric type for your team. Next up is Emolga. This is a Pokemon that's probably more of a challenge run Pokemon. It has the same problem as a lot of the Pikachu clones in that it doesn't evolve. But it does have good speed, 103 speed. And that's pretty much it. Special attacks, not great. It is super frail. Abilities-wise, you know, static. The only problem is that you're not bulky enough to take a lot of hits, so that's not going to help you out much. And you can see here, acrobatics. Well, you might be able to get that to work, but it's not the best. And it probably works best as a support Pokemon. So you can give it something like Encore, Roost, U-Turn to get it out of sticky situations, Taunt. But this is more of like if you're doing a challenge run, you could use Emolga. If you're doing like, say this is your first time playing through X and Y, just skip Emolga. Dedenne is kind of the same way. And I think it's funny that this Dex has so many Pikachu clones that we're coming across, and this isn't even the last one. We'll see some more as we go forward. But it has pretty much similar problems with, say, Emolga. It is decently fast. Not the fastest, but it has some decent speed. But 81 special attack, it's not the best. It's not going to do much. You can see here, it does have a cool ability, Cheek Pouch, which means when you eat a berry, it's going to actually restore a little bit more of your health. That is a pretty cool ability. You can throw a substitute and take advantage of that, but that's pretty much it. It's more of, like, say, a support Pokemon. See, substitute and recycle to get that berry back, but then Thunderbolt, Grass Knot, and you're not really going to hit things that hard with either of those moves, so more of a challenge run Pokemon. Now, Ampharos, like I said earlier, a lot of the times these electric types are fast. Ampharos bucks that trend because it is slow. It is a very slow, decently bulky electric type. Now, you don't have very many bulky electric types as you go through your playthrough. But maybe you realize you want a bulky electric type, and Ampharos is that bulky goat. Now, let's look at it. Special attack 115. That is pretty good. 90 HP. Helped out with 90 special defense and 85 defense. That is good. Static, you can actually take hits with this thing. So that static might actually activate on something. And like I said, it is slow. So you're not going to be outspeeding very many things. Now, this is one of those Pokemon that does have access to a Mega Evolution. Mega Ampharos gains the Dragon typing. Dragon Electric. That is a great typing. And keep in mind, a lot of these Mega Pokemon are going to be post-game, more closer to the post-game. But say you want to run this thing as you play through the post-game. Well, this thing can hit so hard. Look at that. 165 special attack. That's going to smack things in the nose and knock them out. This thing is really an electric goat. It gains some more bulk, too. HP is still 90, but 105 and 110, respectively, on defense and special defense. It does gain attack, which really, you don't really need that. It's not the best thing for it. And it does get a little bit slower. But the thing I think is great about Mega Ampharos is this ability, Mold Breaker, which, remember I talked about, you know, some of these Pokemon so far, like Jolteon, Volt Absorb. We talked about Plusle and Minun having an ability to Lightning Rod. Well, Mold Breaker ignores that. Say your opponent is like, oh, I've got a Jolteon. I know you're on a Thunderbolt me. I'm going to send it out so it actually heals me. No, it's not going to heal them. You're going to be able to do damage to those Pokemon that normally would have an immunity, and that actually is very helpful. Mold Breaker is great. I do think that's a great ability. And you can see here, move pool-wise, I mean, this is more of a bulky set, but say we go down here, all-out attacker. This has good moves. Thunderbolt, of course, for your electric. If you're doing Mega Ampharos, Dragon Pulse is great. Focus Blast for coverage. Just keep in mind that thing will miss a lot. Volt Switch for a slow Volt Switch. A lot of times these Volt Switchers are fast, and you have to watch out for, you know, being hit on whatever you bring in. This is a slow Volt Switcher, so it'll take the hit and then switch out into something that can actually do a little bit more work. Which, I mean, honestly, this thing can do a lot of work on its own. You don't have to necessarily do that. And look at that beautiful, beautiful hair that this thing has. It is a beautiful beast. So I think Ampharos is a great electric type. Just keep in mind it's slower. A lot of people like faster Pokemon on their in-game team, but this is a great choice, say, if you're okay with a slow electric type. Now, Pachirisu has the same issues as all of the Pikachu clones. It doesn't evolve, and it doesn't really bring much to the table. Now, I do have to admit, this thing was pretty fire in the 2014 VGC. But you're doing an in-game team. The things that made this a great Pokemon in 2014 VGC is not going to help you on your in-game team. This thing has a decent speed, 95, and decent special defense at 90. That's it. That's all it's got. Volt Absorb is great, but I think that's a hidden ability. And I think that's really it. I mean, most of the time when you see this thing in competitive, it's a support Pokemon, which is meant to slow things down with Nuzzle. And that's pretty much it. But yeah, this is a challenge Pokemon if you want to run it on your team. It's just not going to really do much for you. Lantern, we've already talked a little bit about Lantern, but I have to also kind of bring into some information here. So in terms of an electric type, it does give you a water typing, which is a cool type combination. And it does bring some bulk. This is one of those electric types that do have some decent bulk. 125 HP. That is really good. Now, defense-wise, it is garbage, 58. Special defense is okay, and that HP really does help out that special defense. That's really it. Special attack, it's not going to be doing that much damage. So if you run this thing, you're running it mostly because it can take a few hits. But, yeah, challenge run Pokemon, or say you're like, oh, I forgot to put a water type on my Pokemon, and an electric type would also balance out my type combinations. Well, maybe you can turn towards Lantern. Now, we're going to talk about a Pokemon that, you know, you do get access to in Pokemon X and Y, and this is a great electric type, Zapdos. It is a little bit more involved in catching this thing because you have to actually hunt it down in the overworld before you can actually find it in its cave and capture it. But if you decide to do that, this is a great choice. Now look at that, 125 special attack. That is good. 100 speed, that's a good speed stat right there. And it does bring some decent bulk. 90 HP, 85 defense, 90 special defense. It's made to take some hits, and it's made to just hit things really hard with that special attack. Pressure is what you're going to have in-game, since it's going to be your in-game team. But you can see here that it does bring some really good moves. Thunderbolt and Volt Switch, you can switch out. You can hit things pretty decently hard. It does have Heat Wave as a coverage option. And then Roost will also help you with your survivability. Now, you can also say you want to throw Defog on it. Now, if you're doing competitive, Defog is great. But in game, your opponents don't really use Stealth Rock, so it's kind of a wasted move there. But it does have some decent things. You can throw maybe Ancient Power on it, try to get a boost. Say you put Leftovers on it, Detect will help you with that. And you can get some of the screens, which is nice. So yeah, this is a really cool Pokemon here. It does have some options. You can do something like Signal Beam. But I would say Thunderbolt and Heat Wave, all that you really need on this thing. It is a good Pokemon. And honestly, when I use this thing in competitive, a lot of times instead of Volt Switch, I would throw U-Turn on it. Because a lot of people would throw out their ground type to try to block this thing in. I'd still be able to switch out. But that's in competitive. Generation 6 competitive is kind of a more of an ancient competitive battling. So yeah, this is a great Pokemon nonetheless if you want to use one of these harder to capture Pokemon on your in-game team. Stunfisk is more of a niche Pokemon. It does have decent survivability. I'll give it that. That's all that I'll give it. Because it's not really the best in terms of being able to put out some attacks. Its gimmick is that it can take a few special hits, and that's pretty much it. It is a cool type combination, ground and electric, which gives you quite a few interesting resists. And a really cool resist combination. But that's pretty much it. You're not going to be doing much damage to anything that you're fighting. You can see here the suggestion is Stealth, Rocks, and Toxic, and then Discharge and Earth Power just for stab. And maybe hoping that you get a secondary effect, like maybe lowering special defense or paralysis. That's really it. This is a challenge Pokemon if you want to do a challenge run. But in-game team, if this is your first playthrough, just skip this Pokemon. Now, Rotom, this is one that we have to be a little bit more involved with because it has so many forms. And I'll tell you which forms I think is probably the best ones. But first, let's talk about base Rotom. Electric Ghost, that is a cool type combination. It is fast with 91 speed, and it can hit pretty hard. 95 special attack. And it does get some decent moves. You can throw Thunderbolt and Shadow Ball on that. And that's really all that you need for base Rotom. With Levitate, you don't have to worry about Earthquake. This is a great Pokemon if you want to kind of run something that has like more of a... It's more interesting than just a powerhouse. Fan Rotom, I feel like, is probably, if you want to go with a Rotom form, I would say Fan Rotom might not be the best. Because Electric Flying, I mean, that is interesting, but here you've got like a wasted ability, Levitate. You don't need Levitate when you've already got Flying. It does have a lot of cool resist. Bug, Fighting, Flying, Grass, and Steel. But you can see here, Air Slash is its move. A lot of times these Rotoms, when they change form, they have a specific move that they learn. And Air Slash ends up being the one for Rotom Fan. But yeah, this is a pretty cool Pokemon in concept. It's just not the best. It is bulky, and that's the thing about the Rotoms. They're bulkier than their base form. But they are slower. Now, Rotom Fan, I wouldn't go with that one. Rotom Frost, I feel like that one would also be kind of hard to run because it's weak to a lot of very common types. Electric Ice is a cool type combination. I will give it that. And it does give you some cool things like Thunderbolt and Blizzard. Blizzard happens to be the move that it gains by turning into a refrigerator. Now, one of them that I think is actually a good choice if, say, you do want to run a Rotom form is Rotom Heat. Fire and Electric. That's a cool typing. Look at these resist. These things resist a lot. Steel, Bug, Electric, Fairy, Fire, Flying, Grass, Ice. Only weak to Rock and Water. And, of course, it does say very weak to Ground, but, hey, you've got Levitate. You're not weak to Ground. Unless that Ground type has, you know, Mold Breaker. But other than that, you don't have to worry about that. So, Rock, Water, that's all you're weak to. This is a great type combination with that ability helping protect it from those ground type moves. And Overheat is a great fire type move. It hits things pretty hard. As an in-game team, I would suggest giving it Thunderbolt. But a lot of people use this more as a defensive Pokemon because it can Will-O-Wisp things. But yeah, here was Volt Switch, Thunderbolt, and Overheat. Really great Pokemon. I do love this thing. I think this is probably, in terms of all the Rotom forms, I think this is probably the second best Rotom form. And I'll tell you which one I think is the best in a little bit. But first, let's look at the Mo Rotom. Now, this is also a cool type combination. Electric Grass. You don't see that very much. But I feel like this is probably one that is an in-game team. It might not be the best. Leaf Storm is the move that it gains, becoming Grass type. And that is a cool move. But here's the thing. I think there is one Rotom form that stands above all the rest, and that is Rotom Wash. This, in my opinion, is the best Rotom form. Electric Water, it gives you resist to a lot of things that are very common. And it also gives you Hydro Pump. Now, usually, if you're doing a playthrough and you have electric types, they struggle with ground types. No, not Rotom Wash. This thing can hit those things hard. Water type can hit so many things decently well. Not that many things resist electric and water. Dragon's really the only thing, and grass, but usually you have something for grass types. But yeah, this is a great Pokemon here. A lot of people run these as like a defensive because it is more defensive oriented than base Rotom. But I think this is a great Pokemon. You could throw Shadow Ball on this thing, Signal Beam for coverage. But usually Thunderbolt and Hydro Pump will get you places. And Signal Beam, I would only suggest Signal Beam if you feel like you might end up facing a grass type and Rotom becomes your last Pokemon. You need to have something that hits. I wouldn't suggest throwing this out at a grass type, but it does give you coverage just in case. So, cool Pokemon. Cool Pokemon. Next up is Magnezone. Magnezone is one of those other electric types that is not that fast. And in fact, this is probably in terms of bulk, the bulkiest electric type. Look at that, 115 defense. You don't see that very often on an electric type. 130 special attack. That thing can hit really hard. And 90 special defense is not really anything to ignore. 60 speed. It is slow, so a lot of times other things are going to be going faster. And in terms of that, you know, here's some ideas. Magnet Pool, you can force a Steel type to stay in. You force that Steel type to go in. Now, that usually helps you out in competitive battling, not so much on in-game. Sturdy will help you out. Say you throw this Pokemon out and you don't realize the opponent has Earthquake, because it is very weak to Earthquake. Just keep that in mind. With Sturdy, you can actually live that Earthquake and, you know, fix your misplay later on. Analytic is pretty cool. I think that might be a hidden ability. But since you are slow, Analytic will actually boost the attack if your opponent has went first. And this thing, you know, you want to throw something like Flash Cannon for Steel-type coverage, Thunderbolt, a Volt Switch for a slow Volt Switch if you want to. Move pool-wise, it's not really got the best move pool. It does have some decent things. But really, the thing I like about this thing is it is a very defensive-oriented Pokemon. Look at that type resistances. It's only weak to ground, fighting, fire. Almost everything else that you see, it has a resistance to. Keep that in mind. This thing resists so much. It resists poison. It resists flying, steel, resists bug, dragon, electric, fairy, grass, ice, normal, psychic, rock. This thing has a type matchup to almost every type in the game. So this is a great Pokemon if you need something defensive that can, say, take a hit from any of these types that you're going to see a lot. It's a great Pokemon. Keep in mind, it is slower, but man, does this thing hit hard, and it takes hits too. The last one, and I would say last but not least, but you know, this one's not really up high on my list of electric types. It's Electrode. Now, speed-wise, this thing is a god-tier monster. 140 speed. That is one of the fastest Pokemon that you can find in the game. 140 speed. However, that's all that it's got. Its special attack is garbage. You wouldn't expect that from an electric type. A garbage special attack. But this one is garbage. Special defense, not the best. HP is pretty garbage. Defense is garbage. Now, when you think Electrode, let's kind of talk about this. When you think Electrode, what do you think? You think of how in the anime it goes for Kaboom, right? It's not even suggested to use Kaboom. Why? Look at that attack stat, 50. You're going to rely on a 50 attack stat to go Kaboom? No, you're not. That is garbage. And abilities-wise, you know, Soundproof might help you out. Aftermath, you know, that's not the best. It only relies on being knocked out. And if you're being knocked out, well, then it's better to use a Pokemon that can do damage without being knocked out. And the Static, well, you're not living very much with that HP and defense stat. So Static is just moot. So really, with this thing, a lot of people run it with like support in mind. Rain Dance, Taunt, Thunder, and then Explosion, just so they can switch out and not take any damage on whatever switches out. But yeah, this is a Pokemon that a lot of people run it support-wise. You can throw it out, Reflect, Light Screen, and then Volt Switch it out to send in what you're actually going to do. But yeah, it's a Pokemon that just, I would say, if you want a challenge, you can use it. Otherwise, just skip this Pokemon. I know it's an iconic Gen 1 Pokemon, but it's just not great for your in-game team. Anyway, that's all the electric types in Pokemon X and Y. If I left one out on accident, let me know in the comments. That happens sometimes. Let me know which electric type you might use on your team. And put that in the comments as well. If you like this, give it a subscribe, give it a like, give it a comment. I will see you in the next Pokemon video.